CRM was supposed to improve customer relationships. Instead, it's shorthand for can't resolve much. Which means you may have sunk a fortune into software that just bounces customer issues around but never actually solves them. On the ServiceNow AI platform, CRM stands for something better. With AI built into one platform, customers aren't mired in endless loops of automated indifference. They get what they need, when they need it. Bad CRM was then. This is ServiceNow.
I always have had this wind at the back from my mom. One, if you work hard, good things happen. Be ethical, be transparent, be honest. But ultimately, what she's always shown me is that this persistence to set a path, you can get what you want. As a matter of fact, one of the most exciting things for me is when I was graduating from college, my mom put herself back in school and we actually got our college degree at just about the same time.
Hey, this is William Tincup and Ryan Leary. You are listening, hopefully watching, Inside the C-Suite podcast. We have Laura on today from Deloitte, and we're going to be exploring her career as we normally do. Ryan, how are you doing?
I'm fantastic.
And it is Lara, not Laura,
Yes.
as I bet and lost.
Yes.
So, see, I even better because I don't think Ryan had that one. So.
Why don't we start here? Let's start over. Lara.
Oh, you want to start the whole thing over?
Yeah. Go start from the beginning so it's clean.
Okay. Hey, this is William Tincup and Ryan Leary. You are listening, hopefully watching, Inside the C-Suite podcast. We have Lara on today. Well, I'll just start with this. Ryan, how are you doing?
I am fantastic.
Okay, good. Lara, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
Okay, no worries. Let's start. This podcast is all about you and your career, kind of how you got to the place you're at. So why don't we talk about what you're doing currently?
Well, currently I'm the chair of Deloitte's U.S. firm.
So a very low-level position. Got it. And what does that entail? What does the chair do?
So our firm in the U.S. is north of 180,000 people. We are the largest professional services firm in the country and in the world. And in my role, one of my main capacities is around the board itself, leading the board, which is a board of partners. We are a private business to ultimately make decisions and govern the management team around the long-term viability of our organization. We focus on upholding our brand. We focus on accretive value to our firm. We pass our firm from one generation to the other. We don't have public shareholders. Our shareholders are ultimately the people who work here. And so a big part of the role of the board is to make sure we're in fact doing that. We are also focused on risk. And in this environment today, which we could talk about, it's an incredibly challenging responsibility because we're doing it at a time that there's so many disruptive forces. Navigating those properly for the long term are going to create great value for our brand, for the next generation of partners, and for our 180,000 plus people. If we can't navigate it properly, we're not fulfilling our responsibility.
Right. Did y'all keep accounting and consulting together?
Yes, we are steadfast in our belief that having those businesses together make a ton of sense.
Right. There was a period where a lot of folks in your competitor set split those, and consulting went one direction, accounting went another, and I was always curious as to, like, first of all, why that happened, but how did they work together at post split?
Yeah. So many companies probably about 30 years ago in the big four, big five, big six of these accounting firms did in fact split. We kept our consulting business today, and we think it's one of the reasons that we are as significant in size as we are because we were able to keep our foot on the gas, so to say, that entire time.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'll ask one more question, and I know Ryan's got a battery. The hardest part about being the chairperson is?
It's really what I touched on, the amount of things that are happening outside of the doors of Deloitte
Right.
that you want to be educated and constantly sensing and creating agility is so different. I've been in business for 30 years. You know, generally, maybe you would have one disruptive force, maybe
Right.
at a time that you have to navigate, but we are at a time like no other. You have these technological forces coming at all of us, all of our clients. You have polarization politically. You have a different generation of people expecting different things. You've got geopolitical shifts, wars, the list goes on and on. So, really being current enough to make sure we are, in fact, making the right decisions, but creating that agility to pivot is something that's really, really hard. In my 30 years of doing this, all those learnings are helpful, but they don't get you to the next day.
Yeah. Lara, how do you handle decision making? We're talking about making big decisions that impact a lot of things, but how do you actually go about handling decision making itself?
Well, one, I try to do the best I can to get different data points. As I said, you have to move fast. So at some point, you can't get every data point that you would want, but I try to get the different data points. I try to understand trade-offs. Decisions are never 100% about making one choice. Decisions are ultimately about trade-offs among different choices. So really understanding the implications of different choices and trying to land on what makes the most sense. I'm a big believer in listening. So I also try to seek input from people to make sure I've got all the factors I should be thinking about. And ultimately, I try to be a steward of our firm. You know, we often talk about like the values of an organization, the mission of the organization. You know, I am very steadfast in I'm a steward of the firm. I'm here to make the firm better. And it's not about a day's performance, a year's performance, an individual person's performance. It's ultimately about creating a firm that lives and thrives. And that's really freeing because when I look at different choices, it leans me down one and I can do it. I may not make everybody happy, but I
Yeah.
ultimately can explain it, and I can explain it in a way that aligns with sort of what I think we all want from our firm and what we want for our owners and leaders today, as well as what we want to go into the future. And that agility piece is really, really important, not to be so rigid in your decisioning that you can't second guess yourself. I mean, you can't spend your whole life second guessing yourself, but if you make a decision, you have to be open to just, you know, iterating in this environment and not feeling like you're stuck. We could talk today about risk, but we're going to make mistakes in this environment, and we should. And when we do, we just need to be able to pivot and not try to hold on to something that doesn't make sense.
It's funny. We talked about this the other day about with AI and Gen AI in particular, people having kind of an analysis paralysis where they just not making decisions, thinking that there's going to be a magical moment. And the conversation basically said, you know, it's experimentation. You're going to have to try stuff and fail, and be okay with some level of failure. Maybe not with clients, however, but you know, being able to innovate and try things that are new and then ditch it or innovate it, like I said, calibrate, recalibrate, and kind of move it forward. I love that.
Yeah, and
So
you
let's
have
go
to. That's
backwards.
where
Yeah, go ahead.
that's where a board could come in because you could have a culture that expects no failures, and if that's the behaviors
Right.
you set out, you're going to get that behavior back. You're not going to get people taking risks. So you have to. A lot of things in these roles is about setting out a culture that you want people to live into, and one of them is, you know, calculated risks are more than fine. Just, you know, fail fast, and learn from it.
Yeah.
I lo-
I want to touch on one thing you said, Lara, about listening. You said you have to listen. So, a couple questions here, or just ask one. When is too much listening for a leader? When does a leader need to say, "Okay, I've listened. Now I need to make my decision and move forward"? Like you said, you can always explain it, but when is that moment? How do you determine that moment of I've listened enough?
Well, maybe a couple things just to lead into it. One, listening is not hearing. Listening is literally an active listening. It's an adjective,
Right.
it's a verb at the same time. It's not about
Yeah.
hearing. So that's one thing. Just going out and saying I did a set of conversations, but you didn't really listen and know what you were listening for is really important. Two, don't go for an echo chamber. I find some leaders pick people that they want to ask to get input on because they sort of know what they're going to say and they fill this echo chamber in their head. It really is about seeking people that bring a different perspective, people that are coming at something different from you, either because of their lived experiences, their age, whatever it may be. So another piece of it is doing that. And for me, it's ultimately about finding a point where there's like a law of diminishing returns. You're poking at what people are saying, and you sort of poke enough that nothing new is really coming up, that you're not going to ultimately change your mind. So it could be one conversation, it could be 10 conversations, but someone in there, when I listen, I'm ultimately trying to poke at what they say. I play it back to them. Is this really what you're saying? And ultimately, when I continue to do that and I don't land with anything really emerging new or different, in my mind, I've determined that it's different. But you have to make sure you're hitting the right people. That's as important as the act of listening itself.
That's so great. I'm glad you asked that question, Ron. Let's go backwards. Let's go back to high school, college, wherever you'd like to. What was your dream? What did you want to do with your life?
Well, I'm going to go really way back and then I'll get to that. I mean, when I have these conversations, I always want to talk about like what has formed who I am today and why I'm here. And like so many of us, my story comes through the lens of my mother. She's been and continues to be my biggest hero and my biggest supporter. But I got to see a lens of somebody who really had to make some really big choices early in her life. She was born in the 40s. She graduated high school in the 50s, which I know seems like a long time for a lot of people. But at that time, for a woman, the options coming out of high school were incredibly limited. She was basically told by her parents, and this wasn't like her parents were bad people. This was just the environment that the world was in at that time, that she could either go get a vocational degree and become a nurse or a secretary, or she could go find a husband to take care of her. And that was the environment which she was in. And matter of fact, most recently, she told me her classes in high school were all classes around typing, home economics, and sewing.
Right.
And by mistake, she actually ended up in a reading literature class, and she got pulled out because that was not a class for women. And she did get married.
Wow.
She had four of us. I'm her youngest. I'm her only girl. I have three older brothers. And I watched, a lot of times they talk about lessons in life coming from people telling you, and particularly as a parent, tell your kids to be kind, tell your kids to be good, tell your kids to treat others in a certain way, the way they would expect to be treated. But the reality is the best lessons are shown. And I got to see my mom during my formative years through high school work multiple jobs, raise four children, and then really get focused on the women's movement in the 60s. She wanted to create a generation of people who had choices that she didn't have. And she was out stuffing envelopes, doing all those things so that when I got out of high school, she literally said to me, baby, you can be anything you want. We did all this work for you. And it was the honest truth. It was the biggest way of paying it forward. So when I got out of high school and I got into college and I got into the workforce, I always have had this wind at the back from my mom. One, if you work hard, good things happen. Be ethical, be transparent, be honest. But ultimately, what she's always shown me is that this persistence to set a path, you can get what you want. As a matter of fact, one of the most exciting things for me is when I was graduating from college, my mom put herself back in school and we actually got our college degree at just about the same time. And that's sort of the types of things I got to see growing up. So the why am I here is I've always wanted to be an accountant. I get made fun of for this, so you all can join in on the group of people that make fun of me.
We might.
This actually goes back to seventh grade. I was in a middle school where in one of the classes, I don't even remember what the class was, but there was a module. And the module was teaching us how to do the books and records for Firehouse 123. I learned, what the firehouse owned. I learned how they made their money, how they paid their people. It only went on for a few weeks, but I had this sensation during it. Maybe it was the logic piece, maybe it was a way to really, through accounting, understand how a firehouse worked. But whatever it was, I had this feeling. As a matter of fact, many, many years later, when I had children, I wanted to teach them what love was. And I said to them, what do you feel like when mommy walks near you? And I was told, I get this fluttering in my stomach and I get this warm sensation. Well, that's the feeling I had when I was doing the books of records for Firehouse 123. So from that moment on, unlike so many people today, I sort of knew what I wanted to do. And I went to college, always pursuing to be an accountant, always pursuing to be a CPA. And never in my wildest dreams did I think that would lead me to where I am today.
Well, that is really interesting. And I think if I were to ask my kids what they felt when I walk, it's not going to be that.
It's not going to be tingling.
It is not going to be that at all. No.
Well, I have two boys, so it's of course different than your three girls, Ryan. But yeah, it wouldn't be tingling. It would be not a warm, fuzzy feeling. I love it. First
someday.
of all, I have one child that is following in your path, not accounting, weapons engineering. And I have one child that has a 13 or 15-year-old that has no idea. He likes basketball and girls. So that's about it. So I get that. I love the fact that you knew early and that you followed it. What was the first job? First of all, where'd you go to college?
I went to Baruch College in New York City. It was an amazing time. I worked a full-time job. I come from a very humble background, humble beginnings. I had to borrow money through loans. I made just enough money not to be eligible for grants in my family, but not enough money to actually pay for college. So it was clear Baruch, and I went to SUNY Albany as an undergrad, and I went back for a graduate degree. It was clear those were going to be the types of schools I could afford to actually take a loan from. Baruch is an amazing institution. I spent a lot of time with them. And at the time, I was commuting from Long Island. I was living at home. I was getting up at 4 a.m. every day to take a train to New York City to be at my desk at 8 a.m. at a small accounting firm that I worked at from 8 to 4, 8 to 5. And then I would go down to Baruch and I would take classes. And about 9 o'clock at night, I'd find myself at the Penn Station in New York City. Some of you may know where that is. Even at the Penn Station bar sometimes doing accounting homework. I remember them sort of laughing at me at that bar and doing it on the train home and then getting home at 11:30 and doing it all over again. And so that was sort of the schooling time. My first real job was here at Deloitte. And I don't want to say that the small firm wasn't, but the development opportunities, it was so clear from the moment I got here that I was going to learn from, today we have 180,000, whatever our number was back then, that I was going to have this opportunity to learn from people. And that is our mentality. We are an apprenticeship mentality. We're not plumbers per se, but we try to take professional services leaders and help grow the next generation of leaders. And it's something we're prideful of. And I could see immediately that I was going to have a great opportunity at this firm.
Can you talk a little bit about that move? So you came out of college and you started at Deloitte, and you're still there at Deloitte, right? And you've grown, obviously, significantly throughout the years. The mentality of students coming out of college today is very different than it was 20 years, 30 years ago. Maybe talk a little bit about when you came in, how you saw the opportunities, what those opportunities were, and maybe we'll get into how you navigated that, because you've had multiple careers within Deloitte.
Yeah, well, I'll start maybe on like my mindset, because I think that's what you're hitting on. Did I think when I started in 1993 as a first-year auditor that I was going to be here 31 years later and I was going to do all the zigging and zagging and be super happy? The answer is no. Every time I was in a year role, I kept trying to challenge myself. Am I learning? Am I getting better? And a little bit with blind faith, I looked up. I wouldn't say, and to be totally honest, if the partner was driving a nice car, I would be like, okay, or the senior manager, maybe that's something I could have someday. I didn't understand again, because I didn't have this corporate background, all the mentoring of what I got did not come from my mom and my family, because they didn't work in this environment. How I dressed, how I spoke to people, how I sought out opportunities, all the things we could talk about were all taught to me here. And so it was a constant calibration of, is this fulfilling me right now? Am I advancing? Am I doing different things? Am I learning different things? And when I look up, do I continue to see potential? And until I was probably at the firm for 10, 11, maybe 12 years, I think I made partner after 10 years. So call it about 10 years. I didn't even know if I wanted to be a partner. And then I was offered a job to leave the firm, and that created sort of this decision that I hadn't been faced with before. Before, I just felt good every year, and I had to decide, is this something I want to do? And I ultimately realized that I was going to be better here than going somewhere else. That when I looked at a lot of the companies that wanted to hire me, they were small accounting departments. Many of them weren't better than me. They were going to, be at a lower level than me, and I wasn't going to get better. I realized that I was in a big pond, smaller fish in a big pond, but that I was going to learn a lot from these other fishes, and there was going to be a ton more opportunities. So I stayed, and I've pretty much done the same thing throughout my entire career. Even being the CEO of our audit business, I didn't decide I wanted to do that 20 years ago. It was sort of something as I got closer, and it was like, okay, I think I could do that. I think it's going to give me energy. And that's sort of been the approach I've taken. And so when I think about this generation, I get I don't think I want to be in the same place for 30 years. And I think there's sort of just a self-doubt about, will the same place fulfill me? And so I think it's the same challenge, making sure we're all fulfilled. And I think, as opposed to assuming it can't be, it's about pushing the boundaries to think, yeah, this place can actually do it for me. And I think Deloitte can. I can't speak on every organization, but we have so much going on. I think people at all generations could find what they're looking for.
Yeah, you don't need to go get a new job. There's plenty of opportunities there that would scratch that itch.
Exactly.
So in undergrad, I took a couple of accounting classes, a lot of debits and credits, T accounting type stuff, so a lot of the basic stuff. And then during my MBA, I took accounting as well, but it was more about managing accountants rather than some of the intel. Although I did take one that was a class reading financial reports, annual reports. So it was a breakdown, the whole class. All we did was take publicly traded companies and break down the annual reports. That was fascinating. What's giving you some joy in terms of, do you like being in the weeds at different points in your career, like being in the weeds of accounting? And because the folks that I know that are really, really great accountants love how it makes sense. They love that it does. If it doesn't come together, then they know how to then go make it come together. But they love that the pieces of the puzzle do eventually make sense. And some people like managing, they get to a certain point and they're just like, I don't want to be in the weeds. I don't want to be doing that. I'd rather manage the people that are doing that. Did you have that? Did you face that at some point in your career?
Yeah, maybe a couple things. One, there is a misconception that, it's ultimately accountants are all in the weeds. When you really sit back, the most effective accountants, and yes, you're right, there is an element of, it sort of makes sense. And that's what I was trying to allude to earlier when I did my Firehouse 1, 2, 3. Clearly, logic and seeing things fit together gave me energy and satiated me a little bit. But for you to be a good accountant, to ultimately understand the art of accounting and how to do it, it is ultimately someone who actually understands how a company makes money. A lot of people say accounting is the language of business. And it gives you a lens into understanding things, actually, quite honestly, at a much higher level. If you went into an organization in marketing, you may not see the entire organization from end to end. But in an accountant, you have to understand the strategy, how they make money, their operating model, their competitive set, their industrial set, for all these things to make sense. So while you go down into the quote unquote weeds to do the bottoms up, it really starts with the ability to understand the top down. And that is something that's really transferable beyond accounting itself. For people, some people like to stay there, and that's great. But if you actually want to elevate your career, it's why you see CFOs, board chairs, CEOs, a lot of different disciplines come from people who have this as a background, because early on, and you talked about it, how you dissected a set of financials. And then there's a lot of other things that come to the job around understanding risk and data. In today's environment, you're going to get exposed to all sorts of technologies through the lens of accounting. You're going to know what your clients are using technology to run their business, to run their accounting, to do your accounting. So it's a very cutting edge profession, and it allows you to do other things. But what I've enjoyed, and to your point, is I also am somebody who's also been drawn to wanting to be interacting with other human beings, meaning I like being with other people. I like engagement. I'm a bit of a cathartic extrovert. So I like having the ability to talk through things with other people as opposed to sit by myself. And what I realized at our firm is you could do the really technical, proficient things that require this great domain, but you could also be a leader. And what a leader is different than a manager. I talk about how managers manage outcomes. They're the ones who are making sure the tasks are getting done, they're getting done on time. Leaders lead people. It's about the ability to get into someone's psyche, to make sure you understand what is driving them to perform better, what's holding them back, really helping them be the best versions of themselves, winning their hearts and minds for a path you want to see them go on. And that was something that I was drawn to. I'm still drawn to as a leader. And it was this ability and desire to be in a human-centric type of role where I could still leverage. You still have to understand. You can't lead people and not understand what they're doing. Mm-hmm. That's really hard. But if you understand what they're doing and then you take the time to create the personal interactions, you're taking a mosaic of all different types of people and you're making them the very best, the very, very best they could be. So that's been my, I'll just say my desire, and something I think the firm has just done a great job letting me do. And when I see people that move into the most senior roles, what really differentiates them is not who the best technician is relative to whatever their proficiency is. It's the person who's the best leader and the person who can create that followership, that desire to see others succeed around you. And that's been something that I'll just say has given me energy and over the years has paid dividends.
Yeah, I want to dig into that a little more because I think that's an important topic. And you brought up you made a mention of a couple of things that really kind of hit me because we've talked about these across multiple shows. And I think we can see, William, the difference between different level of leaders that we've 100%. Interviewed and different level of founders versus managers who were thrust into a leadership role and didn't do so well.
Battlefield promotions.
Yeah. Right, battlefield promotions. So I want to dig in, Lara, a little bit, if you could, on your view, your take on managers who are pushed into a leadership role, because we'll use a salesperson, for example. Salesperson killing quotas every year for years, doing really well, and they now become VP of sales or head of sales, and they tank it. They don't do well. Why? And obviously, you've already talked about some of this, but maybe let's dig a little deeper on that. And is that a good thing, a bad thing? How do we prevent that?
Well, I'll start with I do believe in taking risks, and so it takes two to tango. So an organization, I think, has to look at people that they believe are high potential, and they have to be willing to push them out of their comfort zone, not to a point that's, I said early on, not reckless. And I think as an individual, you have to make your own decision about how far you want to go. But if ultimately you want the highs of highs, I compare it to going to a carnival. You get online for the roller coaster. If you want the lows of lows, you stick with the carousel. If you want the highs of highs, it also means you're going to have to push yourself. You're going to have to be vulnerable. You're going to have to change because what you got you here is not necessarily going to get you there. And you're probably going to fail. And I tell people all the time, if there's not some level of failure in what they do, then they really aren't taking risks. That it just doesn't equate.
Right.
So when I think about though, someone going from manager to leader, I joke a lot about, I play softball still. I know that's probably frightening to people. And I'm in the over 25 women's softball league, and we're way over 25. And I talk about this concept on the team. I'm the manager. And the manager of a team should not be or doesn't need to be the best player on the team. So it needs to be the person who can assemble the people around them and pull the very best out of them. So some things I would be thinking about if I was thrust from one of those roles into a new role, which by the way, in our firm generally happens when we promote people to manager, when they're about 5 or 6 years into their role here, and they've proven they can do the technical side, and now they become the manager. And it's their first time of leading teams at scale of some size. And one of the biggest mistakes I see early on is they continue to drive into the technical proficiency, where at this point, their job is to create technical proficiency across the team. It's not about their own proficiency. They don't delegate. They focus again on they get nervous and anxious about things that are happening in the team, and their first instinct is to do it themselves to fill the voids, as opposed to the instinct as a leader is actually to spend more time with your people and less time trying to fill the holes, to understand what they do. I talk about how someone shows up at work. Like, did they break up with their boyfriend, girlfriend over the weekend? How are they feeling about a sick family member? What's going on that's creating who they are, and really understanding what their goals are and starting to try to customize their success. To become a leader, you have to start to do that, and you have to be relatable. If you're going to ask people around you to trust that you're going to invest the time in them and that they're going to be better for it and not be jaded by it, you have to also show up by being trusted. And some of the things that come to me, it's being human, being even saying, I just took this new role and I'm a little nervous about it. I've done what you all have done, but I've never done it this way. Let's work on this together.
Yeah.
Trying to get them focused on a common goal, knowing where they all come from, being empathetic with people to understand what's going on with them. And that relatability, that empathy, that vulnerability, and then compassion, it becomes a virtuous cycle. But ultimately, it's about stepping out of what you used to do and being comfortable with that. And I do see some people they have a hard time making that pivot. And that's okay. Some people just aren't going to necessarily get to that place, but it's going to require a really big risk, because it's a very different thing than what got you to the position, which you're probably doing great at, which is why you're getting asked to go to the next level.
Right. Now, does one follow-up here, does the company have a role in that process to say, okay, Ryan, you're getting a promotion. We know you haven't done this before. We're accounting for these mistakes. Like, we know this is going to happen. And because I think what we're seeing is a lot of companies don't have support for the managers, the newly appointed managers. They just get put into the position. Should a company be responsible to create that buffer zone and provide that training, or should a manager just be a manager?
Of course, you can't just expect somebody to know how to lead people. Lots of organizations have, relationship building, the art of inquiry, the art of mastery of different topics. So looking for soft skills, leadership development programs, assigning mentors to them that have actually been through the type of change that they're going through, someone that they can talk to, creating as many opportunities for success. Absolutely, a company has to do that. If they think they feel so highly in that person's ability, they should know that they don't have experience in doing what they're asking them to do, which is much more about leading than it is about doing. And they need to be helpful to them and celebrate those who are able to do it. And part of it is just also giving them feedback. I find a lot of people don't want feedback, or a lot of people don't want to give feedback until it's too late. And it's okay to have feedback that's a criticism. I had horrendous feedback years ago. I did a 360 and it was really, really bad. And I mean, really bad. And really bad. I spent a lot of time on how do I make this feedback different? And the firm didn't say well, you gave it a go, you're out. The feedback was about, okay, you've only been doing this for 6 months. Let's work on it. And I worked on it. And as a matter of fact, a few years later, I did another set of feedback like that. And they referred to me as Lara 2.0, which was I took that as a big prideful moment that I had actually become something else. So it also takes the person, when I said they have to want it, they have to also be open to the feedback and open to changing and not doing everything that people tell them. You have to have judgment about what works with you. But yes, I think of management as being a combination of enablement and accountability. Enablement is putting people in the best position to be successful by enabling them with the skills and experiences they need to have, and then holding them accountable to those levels. And that also is a bit of a virtuous cycle as well.
Netflix has a new, monstrous story to tell. In 1950s Wisconsin, Ed Gein lived quietly on a decaying farm, hiding a house of horrors so gruesome it would redefine the American nightmare. Driven by isolation, psychosis, and an all-consuming obsession with his mother, he committed crimes that would haunt Hollywood for decades. The third and most harrowing installment of Ryan Murphy and Ian Brennan's anthology series. Watch Monster, the Ed Gein story, October 3rd, only on Netflix.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
So you've mentioned mentorship 3 times. Not that I was counting. What was mentorship like in '93 versus mentorship now for you in particular?
Yeah. It's changed a lot when you think about, for me, when I started, as I mentioned, zero background in being in a corporate environment. I mean, I literally was like a blank slate, but somebody who had ambition and passion. So I was a good person to have a mentor help me. So I had people that I would say were peers of mine, true mentors, people that had been through the same experiences as me that I could bounce things off of, be a little bit more vulnerable with. I think about mentors as people you can cry to, and that was the environment I was in. I also had advocates. Advocates are people that pound the table for you and help you, get some of the opportunities you're seeking. And I had some great people doing that. And I did look for feedback from them and, in a way that worked for me to make sure I could evolve, I could change. And that it has changed, because as you sort of move up if you're the most blessed and privileged person, which I consider myself to be, over time, you may be advancing at a pace that your peers are no longer your peers. Now they may report to you, and your advocates may no longer be people above you in power, but now also may report to you, or maybe be your peer. When you're the level I am in the firm, it's a lot different. So here at my level, I have to be a little bit more calculated about, who I talk to. So I have mentors outside the firm. I have mentors inside the firm. So as an example, my husband of almost 25 years is a mentor. He knows me as well as probably anybody does. And he also knows how to push me. I remember one time I was super tired. I didn't want to get on a plane. I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. And I don't know if you remember, there used to be these bracelets saying, what would Jesus do? Well, we had a former CEO of our firm. His name was, you remember that? His name was Jim Quigley, and he said, what would Jim Quigley do? Which was his own way of motivating me and getting me to get up and get going. And so I need a smaller, more cultivated list, because when you're at a higher level in the firm or an organization, people don't want to tell you things you don't want to hear. So you have to find people that are courageous and will just tell you the things that you don't want to hear. You have to seek it. Like I said earlier, I find a lot of senior leaders have echo chambers, and so they're surprised when things don't work the way they want. You have to seek feedback and ask about how you're doing, and then ultimately realize that you're going to need a very intimate group, and it's going to be different because people, when you're at a certain level, just may not want to be as open with you because for fear of retaliation or what you may do to them. So it's got to be people you truly trust who know if you're successful, the firm is going to be successful, the place is going to be successful. So that's what I try to do. But it's changed a lot where it was basic fundamentals years ago. And now my questions and areas I look for feedback on are different, a lot different than they were many, many years ago.
Right. So oftentimes we hear the question, what book should I be reading, right? In leadership, for example, what leadership books should I be reading? I want to take a different approach on this one. In leadership, what for someone that's on their way up, they're ascending, what is the big idea? What are the big ideas that they need to understand?
Well, some of them will be a little bit of a repeat. I think in this environment, trusted leadership is paramount. And that means someone who is human-centric, who is a visionary. They have a path that they think we could head towards. They've taken remember we talked about decision-making. They understand all the things that are coming at a part of the organization, at a product, at the organization. And they have a vision, they have a way forward, and they can win the hearts and minds of the people around them. Which means people want to follow them. They're relatable. They're trusted. That, to me, in this environment, is probably one of the most important things. Is really elevating to being leader-like in that regard. The second thing is this putting a premium on agility and being willing to change course, being willing to listen to contrarian views, desiring and looking for contrarian views, to make sure you're creating agility. Being a systems thinker, often we talked about people who go from VP of sales to sales. Systems thinking means you're thinking about culture and how do you incentivize behaviors? How do you incentivize people following the values of an organization? How do you nurture the culture? Because without process and without constant oversight, people are drawn to the culture of a place that they're in, and that attracts people to it. So being a bit of a systems thinker is, to me, another thing. And then I would say, lastly, is just being curious. Anyone who thinks they figured it all out is just not, really reflective of where we are today. And on any topic, if you're talking about the topic of diversity, making sure you're surrounding yourselves by people that don't have the same experiences of you, don't look like you, don't show up like you, to get that curiosity fulfilled. All those disruptors I talked about earlier, being someone who desires to learn as opposed to desires to just know it because they can check a box, and who desires for that to continue. I read like 11 different newspapers every morning on my phone before I get going. And it's all about making sure I'm just constantly picking up new pieces of information to fulfill the curiosity. So those would be, 3 or 4 things I think would be super important for those that are trying to push themselves up a leadership curve.
The last question from me, and it gets back to where you started in your bit about stewardship of the firm. I love that concept. I think not enough people have that in their minds when they take on that position. So if you can, tell us, not the specifics, of course, but just you have a vision. I'm assuming you have a vision for the next couple of years of where you'd like to take the stewardship. Is that something you ratify with the rest of the board or the management team, or like how do you ensure that your stewardship is what you want it to be?
Well, ultimately, one of our main roles of stewardship, is we have a framework that we are focused on 3 things: ensuring we're creating sustainable, accretive value in our firm, we're upholding and shaping our brand, and we're managing and mitigating our risk, meaning we're not risk avoidance, but we're doing it at the right levels. And as a board, to be stewards, you're doing those 3 things, so you could do 3 things simultaneously. You could honor those who came before you and make sure that they continue to benefit from our firm, our former owners and leaders. You ensure that you're giving all the greatest experiences and I'll just say a source of pride in our firm. We call it sense of partnership of our firm. To those who are here today, it could take a lot of different avenues. The work they do, the tools you give them, the experiences they get, the financial support of what it means to be here. You're constantly feeling that. But the most important part where the board really comes in is making sure that while you're doing those two things, you're setting a path for the next generation of future leaders. I joke with people that we don't even know who those folks are. There may be somebody out there in a Deloitte onesie that says future Deloitte leader. And we want someday them to have an ability to join our firm because we got handed something that, and again, it's very different than the mindset in other companies. When I joined in 1993, there were a bunch of people like me dealing with some hard issues. And I tell people if they didn't do that and if they didn't have the mindset on the next generation, I wouldn't be here. And that to me is our biggest responsibility. And that's what stewardship ultimately is. And that's what the board does. So we're constantly challenging ourselves to say, is our governance not just focused in the here and the moment, but are we focused on the things that are creating this long-term sustained path for our firm to make it a stronger firm? And I feel really good that we're all aligned on that mission. How we come and do it every day, of course, we've got different ways of doing it, but I feel good that our board and I'll just say our broader set of owners and leaders has a desire to hand this firm off to the next generation better than we found it.
Drops mic.
Yeah.
Walks off stage. You've been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. I can't even imagine how busy you are. Don't want to imagine how busy you are. But thank you so much for coming on the show and schooling us and also schooling our audience. It's been wonderful.